Hello, everybody. It's Joe from the MiddleGround Mike, and we are at Finding the Middle Monday edition. There's a lot of stuff going on out there about Charlie Kirk and, some of the narratives that are going on. I got a good friend here, Nathan Smolensky. I got your name right, correct? Awesome.
Absolutely.
We've been talking, where do we go with this? The anger, the grief, what went wrong and how can we prevent this from being the new normal? Nathan's got a lot of background in a lot of things, especially in the third party circuit. And, we're going to kind of twist and dive, into some of these things a little bit and go from there. Tell everybody, introduce yourself again to everybody, Nathan.
Hey, everyone. I'm Nate Smolensky. I was a longtime player in the third-party independent politics space. I was state director of the Florida Forward Party. I'm the author of Common Ground from the Ground Up, and I'm also a speaker about things like this. So, as you can imagine, some of this had a particularly personal effect on me. So
Yeah, and like we were talking, I mean, I think a lot of people are still in shock about the whole thing. You just don't know how to, and I don't know if we ever will, right? We may never be able to completely process it because it just doesn't make sense. I notice some people that are feeling extreme about certain things, or they're feeling, it's going to make sense to them, obviously. But, for me, it's not, the situation was a left versus right thing with the guy who did it versus why he wanted his feelings towards him, right? But the propaganda doesn't need to be that way. We need to get, we need to be balanced as we try to look at the problem. This is sensitive for people. And I guess that's why it's like, yeah, we have freedom of speech in this country, but, you should also, not you personally, but, a lot of people should have that decency to not celebrate someone getting murdered, whether it be your worst enemy or your next door neighbor that you love. It's never okay because people got to remember, just like when the guy that you like is in office as president does some crazy things, you're like, oh, but it's my guy. Well, don't forget that in 4 years, the other guy could be in there and he's going to have the power to do something you don't like, so I try to tell people to remember that, it's emotion. Obviously we know, it happened obviously on the September. From what I did read is it was a 30 caliber Mauser rifle. The bullet casings had inscriptions on it, references to some memes and ideological and, anti-fascist statements that, they put on there. I don't know what this obsession is with calling people like Charlie Kirk and Donald Trump fascists, because if they actually just spend about 30 minutes on the internet, they really figure out that we don't really have fascism in this country. There's aspects that can be interpreted that way, but we're nowhere near Nazi Germany levels. There's nothing like that. At least to my knowledge, I could be wrong, going on like that in this country. This kid, they're saying, yeah, he was attending a former tech college student. Recent years, he's definitely become a lot more politically active. Like I was saying earlier, he came from MAGA/Republican household, but he's definitely has shifted towards the left. What are your thoughts on that?
So, yeah, that was a point of speculation in the 24 hours, I think, not after the murder, but after his name first came out and we were starting to get this. It's always fascinating, after growing up and hearing about these tragedies historically, where you have the retrospect, you have all of the information in front of you. Seeing it play out in real time and seeing those 24, 48 hours of speculation of what's going on, even when Charlie's condition was unknown, it's a weird feeling. It is crazy just being through that. And yeah, that was one of the most dramatic things not most dramatic, but as far as the discourse went, people were quick to assign the kid to the other team in certain parts of the internet. And that was one of the most disheartening things to me in terms of the comments that I saw from certain circles. And you'll see, I felt they were rather fringe, either calling for retaliatory violence or insinuating that in some way on the right, or saying he deserved it. He got what was coming to him on the left. That's understood. I obviously deplore all of that, and that's extremely destructive. It's obviously destructive. But the idea of politicizing to the point of making sure your team is the good guys in this and pushing that narrative or the opposite narrative, that's the thing that I think people underestimate the destructive power of. So yeah, I can see, as far as the current facts that we have, as far as the current information that we have, this feels like someone who is associated with more left-wing ideology, radicalized. Does that mean this is an indictment of left-wing ideology? Not necessarily. And I think we need to be taking this time rather than declaring that and concluding that, figuring out, okay, how do we heal? How do we avoid situations like this? Because, yeah, there's just so much tragedy and loss involved here that no
Yeah, I mean,
one,
it's no, like we were talking a little bit about earlier. I mean, with like the loss, I mean, conservative family background, right? Completely in contrast to the trajectory this kid went. And I mean, I know a lot of kids, like we were talking earlier, grow up, me, I grew up, kind of became libertarian at a young age. My dad was a stout union, and all that. And I'm, so and Democrat, and it was like fire and oil, oil and water, just, my dad was always generally kind of pretty mellow about things.
sometimes, yeah, sometimes the kids rebel and they find ways of, when they rebel hard. I think that was, not to make light of any of this situation. I think that was the plot of Family Ties, wasn't it? With
Yeah. Yeah.
Michael J. Fox. It's just,
Michael J. Fox.
yeah,
Yeah.
Michael J. Fox with, yeah, sort of hippy dippy parents and kid is a Reagan conservative. But yeah, I mean, sometimes these people who have this rejection of whatever ideology they're brought into initially, they reject it so hard and they become some of the most active and outspoken on the opposite side.
Yeah. No, that's definitely, yeah. I guess like, I mean, once some of the stuff started to come out, and I think that why some people may have, and it just kind of really not dawned on me, but just came to the forefront of my mind is when that school shooter, I believe in Minnesota recently was transgender, had a lot of anti stuff on there, right? And that was geared towards conservatives. So the messages, I think, in the bullets, the being the anti-fascist thing seems to be the rallying cry of people on the left who hate the people on the right, right? That just seems to kind of be like the monologue they're using, the statements that they're using, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, the other side isn't have, but that just seems to kind of be their platform to expressing themselves right now, what they're doing, and anybody out there who's listening to it, I will say wholeheartedly, I think that that is a bad way to live your life. Not only because it's destructive to other people, but it's destructive to yourself. That's the biggest thing is don't always like do something like that for what you believe. You got to worry about yourself in that end, because when it comes down to it, you're the one that's got to live with your own brain at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And there's just so much tragedy. And when I say, you know, tragedy, this is not just the tragedy of Charlie Kirk and what has befallen his family, his loved ones, his friends. I also, a lot of people will react with rage, will call for justice. And, you know, I, I absolutely call for justice as much as anyone else. But at the end of the day, the kid who, this alleged shooter, this is someone who had all this potential, all this opportunity, and threw his life away for these actions, for this adherence to ideology. And there is something just so deeply saddening about that and how that's going to affect his family, his community, his friends, his partner. I just can't imagine all of that, not to compare that to what others are going through at this time, but just to highlight the point, nobody wins when we escalate like this. Absolutely nobody wins. So,
No, and the ironic part about his partner is that partner's cooperating with the authorities. So
right.
I don't know. I don't know if the partner maybe knew about it and just wasn't taking him seriously. But now they're saying that, there was friends that he was messaging about this too. Now there's tidbits coming out about that, and it kind of goes back to like the school shootings, right? It's not like some folks just wake up one day, grab the gun out of their closet and just start shooting people. No, there's generally a buildup. There's generally signs, and people got to remember, if someone's literally saying, I want to go kill this person, and they're being very specific, that's there's a difference between being frustrated and going, man, I would slap that blah blah upside. There's a difference between that and some of these messages you hear that people that do these things are saying, because it's, when you actually look at it, you're like, how did anybody not notice some of these things these people are saying would trigger that? You know what I mean? It would just be like, okay, hey, to me, if I had a friend going, yeah, I think Charlie deserves to die. He's, anti-fat, or he's fascist. I don't care about his kids. This person should be murdered, laying dead in their own blood, like being just that kind of, you know what I mean? That's a lot different than saying I can't stand that person and, expressing a frustration, maybe a violent action just out of like a hot air. To me, there's just a difference. And when you hear what some of these kids are talking about, it's like, how did nobody around them see it coming?
Yeah. I mean, It's difficult. I'll say to that, it's difficult to distinguish with this person is just kind of talking crazy or this person is seriously considering something very dangerous and very serious. And it's also when we're talking about Discord messages and any potential co-conspirators, I'm actually not super up to date on those details or that part of
It's
the story. Yeah.
as far
Um,
as I know, there's no co-conspirators. As far as I know, there's rumors that there might be, but
yeah.
as far as I know, there isn't any as of right now.
Yeah. And I don't want to speculate on that. Obviously, I'm not super caught up with that piece, but anyone he would be talking to, these are people in that bubble of social isolation with him, in that bubble of alienation with him. And sometimes that is the most dangerous thing. It's the lone wolf. There is the danger of the lone wolf, and we've seen that a few times throughout history. But oftentimes, when you talk about extremist ideology, it's people who yes and each other in the worst way when it's like, these guys are fascists and
Yes.
we got to do something about this. And it just one step and one step and one step forward. And it becomes this confirmation bias and it hardens the belief. I talk actually in my book about what drives acts of political extremism, as I put it. And as far as I see, it's three pieces to the mindset that are really critical, which is one is absolute certainty in what it is that you believe, no doubt. And that comes from being in the bubble. That comes from the confirmation bias. That comes from absolutely rejecting any contradicting viewpoints as evil, as malicious, as this or that. Second is a sense of existentiality to the stakes. This is good versus evil. This is
Yes.
life and death. This is justice against evil ideology, against tyranny, against fascism, against communism, against people trying to destroy our society, any of that. And it is the sense of absolute stakes. And then the third is this sense that the democratic process and society and the law is not going to solve your problem. You have to take it into your own hands. And when you put all these together, and there's a lot of societal and communication factors that spur on each one of these, it becomes this recipe for people making a more and more dangerous conclusion. And I think I'm not an expert on the social psychology of things. When you add to that a sense of meaninglessness that I think a lot of young people struggle with, a sense of longing for purpose, people will look to whatever they can to leave an impact as they can. And it can be a very, very dangerous outcome.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Sorry.
that's no, that's it's spot on. I mean, when you really break it down, and we were kind of talking a little bit earlier, like when you talk about like the radicalization, right? Like this kid had shifted over time. You know, but like as of right now, they're saying obviously single shooter. Some early reports had mentioned other people of interest, but none of that ever came of anything. Discord, to be fair, has come out and said, hey, the platform had nothing to do with it. But then reports coming out from authorities say differently, but nobody's really kind of confirmed it one way or the other. It's just speculation, kind of piggybacking on speculation because, this is a person that was very close to him. When we were talking a little bit off air, and I'm not going to like go into her views, but Miss Candace Owens, and I will say, like, I mean, I won't say like I admire her because that's definitely not what I'm trying to say, but I've admired what she tried to do for a long time, and establish that the GOP is more than just the old white guys club, and I think she did I think her and Vivek did a really good job of breaking that mold. And not just breaking the mold, but also inviting people in that would have normally assumed that and not gone into that camp, right? There's a lot of Hispanic men that are very conservative that before, Vivek and some of them really got involved that would have never even dreamt of touching a GOP voting. And then they're like, hey, it's not what you think. So, but getting to the conspiracy end of it is she's obviously, leftist radicalization, but, she's throwing out there, Netanyahu and there's billionaires that he's taking money from. And she's not saying that in a manner to disparage him at all, because that can kind of come off that way if you don't understand it. I know you do, but I'm just saying for the public. But they're saying that she says she knows personally that people are pressuring him, and but some of her claims are kind of consistent with what the investigators are saying, right? The ideology, the online radicalization, the political motive. So those parts are there, but her claims about Israel and things like that, as far as I know, are not there. But she did say on, I believe it was on X, that in the coming weeks or whatever, the messages are going to come to light and all this stuff. And I'm like, this is going to kind of be like the Epstein files. They say there's this big smoking gun, and then poof, nothing really shows up. It's just a bunch of hot air, because all those Epstein files that were going to get released, that were going to change the discourse, haven't done anything. And I kind of feel like that's what might come from hers.
Yeah. The reason I'm just not inclined to think that deeply, look that deeply, I tried to think about internal consistency whenever you deal with issues of doubt or deal with someone raising suspicion that something isn't what it seems. To me, there's not really any internal inconsistency here with this story as we primarily understand it. There is a weird aspect of not that conspiracy necessarily, but conspiracy theories gaining steam with political violence in general.
Yes.
Earlier, I did mention nobody gains from this. Ultimately, this is something that there's going to be a very staunch response. Like, Charlie Kirk is going to have so many more supporters from this and more people trying to carry that mantle. So many more people trying to carry that mantle. But ultimately, when you have these acts of political violence and political destruction, these do benefit those who are interested in our societal destruction, maybe foreign actors who are looking for that. I'm not saying that to insinuate anything, but the end result of that sort of thinking is everyone's a plant, everyone's a spy, and it leads you to no one can be trusted. And this is one of the most dangerous outcomes of this exacerbation of ideology, rhetoric, political temperature is, it gets scary when you start to become aware of how easy it is to manipulate and how easy it is to raise the political temperature.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's unfortunately very, very easy. I mean, you kind of like going towards the FBI part that we were talking about. I was a big supporter of Kash Patel. I mean, I know there's always some wishy-washy things about him, but I truly believe that Kash Patel has a pure, like, I don't think he has motive behind a lot of his things that he wants to do. I truly believe he has his beliefs, but I think some of his actions have shown when he sees some evidence, he doesn't act on it just because it's a belief. He won't do it until he actually sees the proof. He may believe something, but as FBI director, if you listen to some of the stuff he said before he was, before he was confirmed, he would be going through the nation right now, turning it upside down. But I think as he got in there and started seeing some other stuff, he's like, okay, well, he hasn't said this again. It just seems like, okay, hey, maybe it wasn't what we thought it was. But they're saying that there was some breakdowns. He made public statements, person of interest, they were conflated. There's conflicting removers. If an official states a suspect is in custody, but then that person's released, it can damage the public trust, right? Because everybody's going, okay, we got him, man. We got the guy. And then all of a sudden, boop, nope, that wasn't who it was. So people are going, well, man, did you even really have any idea? It just kind of, not that I don't think the FBI was like being lazy, but they didn't do as thorough of a job as maybe they normally would have, because they were just trying to be like I don't know if it was trying to calm things down, whatever you want to call it. But it did, and now they're saying that Congress may launch hearings into, I got it right here, federal agency readiness, which I don't know. Every time there's a tragedy, Congress always wants to go to readiness because it's like every time you guys do, you make it worse. But that's a whole nother, that's like a whole episode on its own. Social media, internet communities are, radicalizing. Whether there were failures in intelligence sharing between agencies during this, did law enforcement mishandle security at public political events? Have they before? Well, I mean, you go back to, God, I'm trying to blink, in the city where Trump was shot, or grazed, whatever you want to call it.
That was somewhere in Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on the name, but Kash Patel may have inherited some of these systemic challenges, but the speed of this one was relatively fast. But the miscommunication between all these agencies and everybody, I don't even really know if a lot of people were trying to get their political point. You're like, "Ooh, I'm going after the guy, and I'm a good guy," because I think it was just literally everybody was trying to get in front of it the best they could. They were obviously, there's always going to be people who want the political points, but I think people were trying to get in front of it. They were trying to go, hey, we feel this way. We don't feel this way, blah, blah, blah. This is what this is. This is what we're hearing. And it was probably, to me, in modern era, and I think even more so than the Trump assassination attempt, is there was a huge rush to be like, whoa, 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 let's calm down, something of that nature, right? I just felt like that's kind of what the rush to do was.
And that's
Sorry.
been the strongest sentiment that I felt, which is the call for healing, the call for this is not okay. This is where we draw the line, I think, as you said earlier. And that has been encouraging. I'll
Yeah,
say again, yeah, trying to claim the moral high ground and get points for your team is more destructive than people realize. Obviously, the more extreme reactions are going to fuel the fire, but it has been encouraging at this time of how many people I've seen just say, no, this is not okay. And we
right. No,
need to.
yeah, it's a symbolic cost of political violence. If we silence political voices via violence, it attacks our republic and in public discourse. I know a lot of people like to use the words democracy when they talk about America, but what I've always learned is we're a republic with democratic traditions.
Mm.
And that's probably the more accurate statement. You really could say democracy, but we're more of a representative republic, right? But our whole system relies on faith in government more so than a lot of other systems, right? For communism, things like that, they can, whether you got faith or not, you're going to have faith in it by gunpoint. You know, um, America's tried to stay away from that to a point, right? We've tried to be like, hey, the faith in our system, our people believe in us. That's our strength. That, if you have that, it's hard to take down, right? And the country's proven that multiple times. But this danger of the misinformation, conspiracy theories, filling in the gaps when you don't know, and here's the thing, and this is where I think that conspiracy theorists have really kind of been able to take hold and fill those gaps is because so many people don't trust legacy media now. Whereas legacy media 10 years ago would sit there and talk for like 6 hours on the same point, but they talked about it. They would find new things to look at it from, right? And it wasn't always necessarily about a conspiracy theory, but now so many people don't believe anything they say that they turn to the conspiracy theorists because they seem to make more sense because they've seen so many of the people that they were told were trustworthy flat out lie to their face, and I think that that's why you have the rise in some of these things, because hate or love Donald Trump, he wasn't wrong. The media has been lying to us, and they were twisting things to serve a purpose to a degree, and it's dehumanizing to everybody.
Once you get it in your head over and over and over again that in times of crisis, people are going to lie for profit and exploitation, yeah, that can follow logically to a lot of unpleasant places. And that gives sometimes very undue credence and credibility to things that should not be credible and should not have.
1,000% right. As we get towards the end here, one big thing I want to say is, I really appreciate you reaching out the other day, man. I know we were both probably
Mm.
just sitting and scratching our heads and going, what in the world just happened here? It was very traumatizing, I guess, because, you hear about shootings, right? But you don't generally see the bodies and the blood, from these things, right? This was kind of one that if you were watching anything to do with it, you didn't have a choice but to see it. It was just there. There was, and it's that a thing of like, good lord, what the Turning Point USA went from 1,100 chapters to now I think they've got applications. I think the latest number is like 30,000. What was there? Several hundred thousand people. There was already a rally, but it grew even bigger in the UK, pushing for, hey, we are Charlie. And I believe South Korea, France, a lot of these countries all of a sudden are like, hey, whoa, because it's a guy that was like literally advocating for peace, got murdered advocating for peace. He had his views, but he was advocating for peaceful discourse, like, and I think that part of it is what really hits home for people because, like we said, people in the middle are quiet till something goes crazy. And, I get why people close to Charlie are frustrated, right? Because if that was one of my best friends and things of that nature, I probably would be wanting heads of the world too.
Absolutely. And, I want to bring up something I said before we started recording and something I was reminded of a little while ago, which is I used to write a bunch of articles, different viewpoints on politics as a whole, different political issues. And in 2020, as the George Floyd issue emerged and we had riots and we had the greater and greater politicization of the COVID lockdowns, I sort of said to myself, The temperature is too high. I am drowning in the noise. I don't really have a lot to say about these hot, hot buttons, and I'm just going to stay back because I really don't want to be in the discourse right now. This feels too hot. And that is something I regret, and it's something I've regretted more and more lately, thinking about it. Because it's at times like these when emotions can run high that those of us with naturally quieter voices do need to speak up a little. We don't need to yell, but it is when that voice of, hey, how do we actually solve these problems? How can we work together? How can we prevent something like this from happening? How can we work to stop tragedies like this from being as commonplace as they're getting to be? Those voices are really valuable. And so I would encourage any of the listeners in the middle ground or in that broad spectrum of mostly quiet voices to try and have those conversations, because I think you'll be surprised how many people are going to be receptive to that at this time and how many people will appreciate
Oh
that
yeah,
kind
no,
of.
no doubt. You know, everybody's got to push back against the dehumanization, and that's something that was really
Oh, yeah.
big for Charlie. He used that a lot, dehumanizing one another. We should stop doing that. But what people should kind of look forward to this week, just on rumblings. Obviously, there's no facts or not facts, but there's no necessarily any times or anything that's official for some of these things that I'm about to talk about are supposed to come out this week. They're saying official filings, the charging documents are supposed to be released this week. That, and the rumor is that these are going to show more about the motive and the planning behind the situation. They're saying that Discord logs, surveillance, and statements from his partner are going to come out this week. I believe they're going to start organizing the congressional hearings and the transparency about the FBI situation at the state level and the media coverage. Distinguishing verified info versus speculative. The problem is on the right and the left. And I would say in this one, the people on the right were more acting out of anger of why you would kill someone that was peaceful. But people on the
Mm.
left were just, and I'm not saying this because I'm like, ooh, bad lefty, but certain, not people on the left, but like certain parts of the left were, their anger towards him when he was alive. I think it just kind of carried over, and reasoning that may have been there if they weren't feeling a certain kind of way might not have, but obviously it exposed in some people some very vile parts of their character. That everybody has things in their mind, but these folks got to learn how to balance it. I mean, it's freedom of speech, but like people say, it's not freedom of consequence. You're not going to go to jail for it. You're not going to get arrested for it, but you can sure lose your job for it because a company doesn't want somebody out there celebrating someone getting murdered working for them. When especially when it's a high profile thing like that. It's just it's bad.
And this is, you also, you do no good by saying that, by giving into emotion and giving into this sort of base reaction. And you ultimately, it's a bad look for the movement. It's a bad look for your ideological group that
Yes.
others will want to highlight. And this goes for anyone calling for any kind of extreme action or celebrating a death. And this is irrespective of ideology, of what ideology or what group it comes from. It does no good, and it holds us back as communicators. It holds us back from trying to solve these problems that we care so deeply about.
Yeah. I appreciate you coming on today, man.
Appreciate you having me.
Everybody, if you can, like the channel, subscribe to the podcast on Apple, subscribe to the newsletter, all that good schnaz. I'm not pushing a whole lot tonight, because it's just, it's just such a lot. I don't want to say like emotions, but at this point, several days later, it's just still a lot to process, right? And you still got to try to function in your everyday life. And, you just, I encourage everybody, if you've got family you haven't agreed with, things like that, it might be time to relook at the situation and try to reconnect with somebody you lost that connection with. Times like these are what really should drive a lot of us to try to appeal to the better nature of our lives and remember, that like Charlie would say, hey, heart is where, home is where the heart is. Your family, big on that. It's something that he would talk about sometimes is, part of being a man and things like that is, not like everybody. Once you have kids and a family and a wife, and you just start processing things differently. I mean, that's probably it's accurate, right? Because if you'd have caught me before I had a wife and kids, I probably would have thought about a lot of things different. Like, oh, blah blah blah. But now when that hits, you look at those people that are important to you on that level that you didn't have before, and it hits different. And like I was saying earlier, Gen Z is now starting to hit that position to where people they know that close to them have a wife and kids that they're close with and they really love a lot. And so they see that and they, you relate to it. And some of them may be hitting that spot themselves, and uh, it's just it's sad, and they shouldn't have to deal with it, but it's an unfortunate reality. And I encourage them just talk to your family. And if you're feeling anybody, if you're feeling any sort of way about anything like that, don't act crazy. Don't be crazy. Talk to somebody you love. Talk to someone. Just don't do something stupid. That's the number one thing. Don't do something stupid, no matter how mad a political media figure, anything makes you, because in the end, first, they don't care about who you are because they don't know you. They have no idea you exist. You're not going to get any clout by murdering them. All you're going to do is get your name in the history books as a sociopath. It's just not worth it. Most of the time when people do that, they're just kind of reacting like a knee jerk reaction. So, but Nathan, I really appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you for.
No problem. I hope everybody has a good day and, find compassion with one another. Remember, we're all human.
Amen.